Hello and welcome to another edition of Buckeye Banter, where we tell the stories of people who played for or worked around Ohio State athletics. And in this episode, I'm taking a little bit of a venture off the path that we've had. We've had some great former Ohio State athletes, including mostly football. Check those out. Those are evergreen. You can always listen to those. They're telling the stories from the past, so it's nothing of the newer variety. Last edition, we had Seth McLaughlin, though. That's about as recent as you can get. That was a great conversation with Seth, who is working to get healthy and be a Cincinnati Bengal. Well, for this edition, though, Jeff Rapp, longtime reporter, covered Ohio State down in the trenches. So glad to have you join me, Jeff. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for digging up an old relic today, Seth. Uh, this will be fun. I love to spin yarns and tell stories, and I'm guessing that's where we're going to go. So
that's exactly where we'll go. And full disclosure, though, and I'll say this as we go through the timeline. When I was at Ohio State, you were covering the team, Ohio State football and basketball specifically for my purposes. We did some baseball too. You were super helpful to a young guy hoping to get into the business, and so thank you for that. But we'll get through that as well. So, Jeff, tell me a little bit about your background as you headed toward becoming a reporter covering Ohio State. Where did you grow up? When did you know you wanted to do this?
So, good question. Originally from Southern California, but only lived there when I was little, and really did grow up in Central Ohio. And I would say I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I remember telling my parents, like, I'm going to go to Ohio State and I'm going to be a reporter, maybe on TV or maybe a newspaper guy, but I'm going to be one of those reporter guys. And my parents were like, okay. Well, I graduated from a East Side Columbus, city school, and got into Ohio State. It wasn't too hard to get into Ohio State back then. I didn't have to sweat that one out as these poor kids do now. And I remember the first quarter I was on campus. You're supposed to take all these West Campus classes and ease your way in. And I made sure I scheduled an Italian 101 class just so I could be on main campus. So I was that kid that knew I wanted to be at a big school, and I knew Ohio State was going to fit my purposes. They had a great journalism school there, and also a pretty robust athletic program that I enjoyed following. I was a fan of. And then, so I graduated pretty quickly after that, got a job at the old defunct Neighborhood News. I know you reported that level too, Seth. That's a great training ground to do the neighborhood reporting, get to know coaches and families and athletes in certain communities. And I was assigned to the west side of town, the only side of town I didn't know at all. And it was a great era. I was over on the west side of town when there were some absolutely terrific teams. I remember Brian Cross was coaching at Grove City. I'm trying to remember. Gafford, I believe, was coaching at Franklin High at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, these are guys who went on to major jobs and careers. Reedy was very good in multiple sports. Westland had a record-breaking high school basketball player whose name's escaping me. So I covered some really cool stuff and learned how to build up relationships and kind of earn trust. And I think that's a big part of reporting. And also try to be fair, like not pot shot, but also try not to be a fan. And that was a little difficult for me because I was a pretty rah fan kind of guy. I love sports so much. It's easy to get swept up in the moment and all that. But and I did some high school reporting. I was a stringer for the Delaware Gazette. I started working part-time at various publications. Oh, in between all that, I did work at the Dispatch downtown as a sports clerk. That was Ray Stein was the assistant editor at the time. I worked with some really awesome people, including Aaron Portzline. I think Aaron was like a 19-year-old kid when I started at the Dispatch downtown. Just excellent experiences and getting to do some cool stuff. When I was at the Dispatch, George Strode, who was the sports editor back then, God rest his soul, what a great guy. He really took a shine to me and tried to give me some assignments to see what I could handle. And I remember one of the ones that I really enjoyed was covering an exhibition tennis event that had Jim Courier. This is how long ago this was, by the way, Seth. This is 1990. Okay. Jim Courier was the #1 player in the world, and the match was against Andre Agassi. So there was a lot of build up to this. And I wrote in advance. I interviewed Andre Agassi over the phone, which was interesting. Got Courier after the match. And so I remember I wrote a story about some 8-year-old kid who rolled a 300 or whatever. They made me the amateur sports editor, whatever that means. So that was really fun. And but I knew that I wanted to do more and do the big time sports. And I was a Lantern reporter and had the beat for men's basketball. So my training ground with Ohio State goes literally back to like 1988 when I was a student writing for the Lantern, covering the Gary Williams coached basketball team. And that led me to get some assignments covering basketball. My path is really similar to Steve Hellwagon. I know you know Steve very well. He was a basketball reporter mainly for Buckeye Sports Bulletin before he worked up to being editor, and now he's at Bucknuts, and he's done all these great things. But mine was pretty similar to Steve's in that I just kind of filled a role and a need with covering men's basketball, showed I had some passion for it and hopefully some competence. And I worked at Scarlet and Gray Illustrated, and eventually I was a stringer and a part-timer for Columbus Sports Publications, which the main publication, of course, is Buckeye Sports Bulletin. And it didn't take long for me to be full-time there. I think I came on full-time in 1992. Might have been before that. The years run together. But yeah, so the 90s, it's kind of funny. People around here look back at the 90s, especially football, but also some of those dark years of basketball and think, ugh, the 90s. I love the 90s because those were my salad days, because that was when I was elevating in my career. We had great, we just had accessibility with the coaches and players. I remember I had the home phone numbers for both the coordinators when I was at Buckeye Sports Bulletin. So when Frank Moskowitz, who's still there, by the way, was the publisher, and he'd say, Jeff, I need you to do a spring, inside the defense advance. I need it, I need it by X. I'd call Bill Young and go, can I come in and interview you to get a whole run through on the defense? Sure. Meet me at the Woody, blah, blah, blah. And we'd get it, stepped right around the athletics communications people sometimes.
Yeah. I have that story. I have that story as well. Just skipping ahead a little bit. When Jim Tressel got hired, he had done his introductory press conference in January. He did his recruiting, signing day press conference in February, and then we didn't really see him much. And then to kind of introduce, the beginning of spring football, he did a thing out at the golf course like John Cooper used to do. And I walked up to him afterward and introduced myself as student radio and all that. And I said, hey, I've tried to go through the channels to try to get you to come on our talk show. I believe you've said some things about, wanting students more involved and wanting to be, I guess the word today would be transparent, right? As far as that goes. And I said, but I'm getting pushback on asking you to come on. I said, could I ask you personally, would you come on our radio show? And he says, give me the number, give me the time, I'll call. Yeah. And Jim Tressel called, 2 seconds after the time I told him, and we hit the ground running and had him on for about 25-30 minutes on the student radio talk show. And yeah, sometimes you build those relationships personally, right? Because and it's not that you're trying to, but like sports information, PR, those people are there kind of obviously for good reason. But sometimes, yes, sometimes
they've got a gatekeep. I get it.
Yeah. But let's go backwards a little bit. George Strode, incidentally, grew up where I grew up, Southeast Ohio, Morgan County. And actually, I almost took that same job you were talking about, the clerk job. But they were nervous. He and Ray Stein both were nervous about the fact that I was calling Ohio State games for student radio. And those are big nights. The football days, all the reporters were sent to the horseshoe on those days. And then, the clerks had to kind of step up and do even more. And they were nervous I couldn't make it back to the dispatch in time to really be helpful. So I didn't end up taking that job. I kind of regret that at times, but I did have the good experience of calling the games. Let's talk a little bit about like your first memories of Ohio State football specifically. Obviously, as you grew up, let's say high school and into your college years, Earl Bruce, then John Cooper. Tell me a little bit about the 80s and, being here in town in Columbus,
Yeah.
what the vibe around the program was, how different it was, and what you could see back then.
Yeah, Earl. I mean, Earl it's funny. And of course, I ended up working with him for
Hmm.
many years at 610 WTVN as an analyst. And as everyone did, I called him coach, but obviously, I didn't play football at Ohio State, but even when you're a student that era, he's your coach. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So it's just, I really thought Ohio State in the 80s was going to do something special. I felt, he comes on his first year in 79 and they
Right.
get all the way to the Rose Bowl and we end up 1 point short and lose in the final seconds to USC. And you're like, well, this stinks, but it's going to happen. And I always tease my brother because he's 5 years younger than me. He was on campus for 3 months. He went to Notre Dame and they win a national championship his freshman year. And I went to the bowl game with him. Like, man, I've been waiting for this my whole life. And here you've been here just a few months and you're celebrating a national championship. I really thought that was going to happen in the Earl era. Uh,
Hmm.
as we know, there were some impediments there. For whatever reason, he had trouble with Wisconsin. And there were some other kind of daunting moments. It's still hard for me to believe, Seth, that 84 team lost 3 ball games.
Yeah.
I mean, holy cow, were they good? And they had a killer schedule, but they had the weird game at Purdue with the 4th down throw where Tom Zach lost track of what down it was. Trying to remember. Obviously, they lost the Rose Bowl, which shouldn't have happened. They were much better than that USC team. They just played a little tight. And I'm trying to remember what their other loss even was that year. But that was also the year of Keith Byers and the shoe coming off. And I was at that game as a student. And I was also at the Iowa game in the rain the next year when they beat #1 Iowa and Chuck Long. There were some great moments and then some just devastating losses that seemed to wreck great seasons. But, I have a lot of memories just as a fan and a student when Earl was let go in 87. That was tough.
Hmm.
Rick Bay goes with him, the athletic director. That was a momentous thing. Frank, going back to BSB lore, he had a reporter you may know named Craig James, not the Craig James, but
Oh, yeah. I worked with Craig James at Suburban News.
yeah, Craig was a great high school writer and a really nice guy and a good guy, a very competent guy. But he came back. This is kind of BSB legend. He came back from the double press conference where it's like we fired the head coach and the AD's resigning and all this. And he sat down, and this is under immense deadline pressure and was trying to formulate, where do I start with this or whatever. And apparently Frank went up to him, just yelled in his ear, write something. Because, he needed to get going. Now, when I was at that level, we weren't competing with the Dispatch. We weren't putting out a daily newspaper. We were putting out a
Hmm.
weekly. It was a different process, and we weren't on the same nightly deadlines. But there were times when things like that would happen, like on a Monday when we're supposed to go on a print. That seemed to be when they'd fire coaches and stuff like that. So that still got stressful sometimes, but I didn't learn about that until I started in the business, like I said. But Ohio State, man, the lineage on it. If you look back at the Michigan game, I would challenge people to do this. Go back to the Michigan game in 1988, find that on YouTube. You want to watch an absolutely beautiful, balanced, varied offense playing to its capabilities.
Hmm.
Watch that Ohio State. And I know they lost 35-31. I don't think they could have played any better. Like Jim Coletto opened up the playbook and they did everything. They executed and almost knocked off a Michigan team that was way, way better than them. Then obviously 89, Michigan had a great team, a Rose Bowl winning team, and it didn't get better. But through the 90s, I say this all the time about the Cooper era, and I mean this. I get it that John Cooper lost big games. Some of the bowl games didn't go well, and we know the record against Michigan. He brought in some all-time great Ohio State players. And I mean, if you, Seth, were going to construct a two deep of the very best Ohio State players of all time, you're popping in all kinds of guys from the Cooper era and basically the 90s.
Oh, absolutely. Now,
There's no doubt about it.
I wanted to kind of workshop a couple of thoughts. Number one, and to your point, we'll get to the athletes in a moment, but so that's part of it. John Cooper it took longer to get moving than what would probably be allowed today, right? He gets hired in 88. The real fruits of his labor didn't come until arguably 93, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could consider 92 winning at Syracuse, and then certainly the tie. But so 93, certainly they rose up in the rankings. Number two, I was born in 79, so I don't remember the Rose Bowl run in 84. I don't remember the great season in 79. So for me, that 93 team, I still remember my English teacher and I just I'm marveling. Like, they're ranked number 3 in the country. This is amazing. You know, like, to me, that was new. I'd never seen that.
Sure.
But I guess what I wanted to say is, like, scheduling changed right around the time John Cooper's team started getting better, and they played a Bowling Green team or a MAC team rather than playing. I mean, look at some of those schedules in the late 80s. Your non-conference games are like LSU, Florida State, like all these bigger conference teams. And then all of a sudden it became more in vogue somehow. I think maybe with the added 11th game, like, becoming more accepted, or maybe even the 12th game sometimes. It became more like, hey, we'll play one major conference game, maybe two, but then the rest of these are going to be smaller games. Like, can you talk about how that shift happened and kind of like the I don't know, did you notice it at the time, I guess would be the question.
I did. And I think a lot of that was Andy Geiger. And I remember him dropping his philosophy when he came. Remember when Andy Geiger came in, he kind of first thing he did was he felt like he had a mess to clean up with OSU basketball and the whole Damon Flint scandal, which is such a ridiculous scandal compared to everything that we see now and NIL and everything. It was literally over a roll bag and saying hi to a grandmother and just some of the most lame violations. But anyway, that got stretched out over time and he had to deal with that. And the Randy Ayers, bloom was rose was off the bloom, or however that phrase goes.
Pretty quickly. Yeah.
But with football, I do remember Andy talking about, with the addition of or the way the schedule was laying out, he felt it was important to have an in-state opponent, have a marquee opponent, and he would never put it this way, but have a guaranteed win kind of opponent, which also could be, a Bowling Green or something like that. Although some of those games ended up getting pretty sketchy.
Yeah. Although Ohio State has lucked out. They didn't play Roethlisberger. They didn't play the Urban Meyer Bowling Green teams. It seems like over time, a lot of times the MAC schools they play, I think PJ Fleck maybe brought a good team in, but not his best team. Like, it's interesting the way it's all worked out.
It is. And I would add, with the 12th team, ideally, I mean, we're out of this era now. I think it's great when you play a service academy team too.
Yeah, it's nice.
I know Notre Dame valued that as well. Just so you can use that as an educational week for your players and realize, the quality of student athlete you're playing against there. To me, that was an ideal schedule. And I don't think Ohio State needed to apologize for that, as long as they were playing, in Oklahoma or somebody like that, USC. I mean, you are right. You cannot compare eras fairly without looking at what those non-conference schedules of the 80s looked like. And I would challenge the viewers right now, like, go back and look at that. And even like Utah and Colorado and teams that weren't very good at the time that Ohio State played out of conference, they're still major conference schools. Syracuse, they played Oklahoma. You mentioned the home and away with LSU, unheard of now, of course, right? Like, there were Florida State. I think Art Schlichter broke a lot of passing records in the Florida State game in 81, I want to say, and OSU lost that game. I mean, that would devastate a season for some people
Right.
years later. But those were the dice that were being rolled back then.
Yeah, complain about 9-3 Earl. Now, certainly now
Right.
in the larger playoff era, you still want to be at least 10-2 to try to make sure you're safely in that playoff. Ask Alabama fans, I suppose. But 9-3 Earl, if you played, Ohio University instead of Tennessee, or whomever, it would be like, okay, that's all of a sudden a playoff team. So let's talk. I want to set this one up by talking about basketball. You mentioned Gary Williams.
Yeah.
The biggest shame, I think, for Ohio State fans and the program itself in basketball was that Maryland ran into what it ran into with Lynn Bias and then Lefty Driesell and the sanctions and things like that. And the only really good coach that a solid ACC program at the time was going to be able to lure there with all the sanctions was going to be an alum, right? And so they bring Gary back home, and that's Ohio State's to their detriment, right? I mean, he had recruited these classes. He had a nice run there, leading up to Jimmy Jackson, and then he was ready to guide that team. Probably in my argument would be further than it got to go, right? In the next couple of years. I guess before I ask the next workshop type question, take me through like Gary Williams as an Ohio State coach and the intensity and the type of program he led.
Maniac. Like it's just, he was crazy. Like I've never seen intensity like that. I would watch practice, and I can remember one time. It's kind of funny to tell the story now because it was a big deal back then and it's a joke now. But Ohio State got a new center hung scoreboard in Old St. John Arena back in the late 80s for $1 million. Yeah, it's like I think Big Bear or somebody sponsored it or whatever. And so that was the game changer to see that in the arena. Well, I'm watching practice and Gary's not happy with how it's going. And he's being quiet, which was even more scary when he wasn't saying anything. He knew an eruption was coming. And he finally, we were running a play. I think they're getting ready to play Iowa, and they're working on out of bounds plays because Dr. Tom was really good at that stuff, right? And he said, he knew they weren't getting it. He said, Jay, give me that ball. Jay Burson rolls in basketball. He punts it in the air and absolutely murders this ball. And it goes up, it slides along the new, like it could have blasted out some lights or I don't know, some circuits. He kicked it so hard. Luckily, it just skimmed by the outside part of, and it went up into the flag and it like folded the flag, like the flag that's at the very top of the building, folded the flag up and then came back down. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, he was crazy. And Tony White, who's a good friend of mine, who was a tri-captain along with Jay, and Jerry Francis has got some just epic Gary Williams stories, on the road stories and things that he used to say. But I will say this, he was very good to me. I was just an OSU student, but because I wrote for the Lantern, I got one-on-one access to him every Monday. And he was very kind to me, very friendly. He didn't ask, what are you writing or anything like that. He took the time. And I remember after the 89 season, I was already graduated. Late in the year, they played Michigan. And this would have been like Glenn Rice, Ramil Robinson, Michigan, that won the national championship. It might have been the final home game that year.
And it would have been Jay Burson's sideline with the broken neck.
Yeah,
so
that season.
Team,
yeah.
That was a tournament team until the injury, and then it just...
Oh, absolutely. I think they were ranked like 12th in the nation when Jay got hurt at Iowa. And then they couldn't win a game for like, a month. And then they started to get it together and they ended up making a little bit of run in the NIT, but they were not on the same footing with U of M, obviously. But I came down from out of the stands just to say hi to Gary. He had just done his radio show and he was going to go into the locker room. I said, I just want to say hi. He said, Jeff, come here. I go, what's up? He goes, hold this. He takes his jacket off, hands it to me. It is soaking wet, like somebody dragged it in a bathtub. And I go, what? He goes, every game. And I was like, here you go. Like, yuck. Like, but he was nuts. but and then Ohio State makes their run, which is one of my great reporting memories, is just covering that Scooney Mike team of '99, and they go on their Final Four run, and you're thinking, well, here we go. They're going to match up with Maryland, and then Maryland gets knocked off by St. John's in Knoxville after Ohio State takes out Auburn, who was the one seed in the South. A funny sidelight story I'll tell you real quick. I mentioned Steve Hellwagon, my old cohort, my friend. We're still good friends. He had a group of friends that came down for that game against St. John's that obviously won to get to the Final Four. And now we're in Knoxville, Tennessee on a Saturday night and aren't driving home till the next day. And like, well, should we go out and celebrate this or whatever? So we go to a bar on campus, and UT is on spring break. There aren't that many people there. So the Buckeye fans kind of took this bar over. We come back, and let's just say one of Steve's buddies was a little overserved, and we spot who was it? C.M. Newton.
Yeah.
Who was maybe the president of Kentucky and was or head of the committee at the time.
Yeah, he was a big wig with the NCAA by that point.
Yeah. He goes, Steve's friend goes over, puts his arm around C.M. Newton and bear hugs him and goes, "Thanks for putting us in the South, brother." We're all cracked up. And Jim Delaney, who's with him, the commissioner of the Big Ten, just cracking up. Like, oh, and this is great.
So I got a couple of stories on that too, because I was with student radio at the time. Yeah. The decision was made, well, it was made for me that I wouldn't be able to broadcast the games because Host Communications had the whole thing with Westwood One and all that. And it was kind of a weird deal. Yeah. And so we didn't get to broadcast the games, but I got a press pass. And so I come to the game. I've got a seat. They did that first row overflow basically around Thompson Bowling Arena there in Knoxville. And we're kids who grew up in this era. I loved the 92 team, obviously, with Jimmy and those guys and Gent. But we're like, this felt to me at the time, I'm almost 20 years old, okay? At that time, from 1992 to 1999 felt like an eternity, okay? Yeah. So looking at it now, it's like, okay, that's not that long. Ohio State's been good or bad for longer stretches. Bad, not as good lately, right? So for a much longer stretch than 7 years. But at that time, to me, it felt like forever, okay? And so we don't even know. We're like, we just made the Sweet 16. We're going to come down here, and we're going to get a hotel for one night, and, we'll probably just lose the game. It's fine, and then we'll go home. We go. They win the game. We go to Waffle House, and Nashawn Coleman's dad's there just yucking it up with us. Mm-hmm. And then one of the people that went with us, I won't name names because they're not going to be happy with me. They're basically like, "No, I got to work tomorrow. We got to go back to Columbus." I'm like, no. Let's just get the hotel for another couple nights, and we'll just be here. It was Thursday, Saturday, right? No, I got to work Saturday morning. I can't get out of it. All right, we'll drive back to Columbus Friday, and then Saturday morning, the rest of us will come back. And so we do that. And we drove all the way up and all the way back. And this is before 9/11. And my college roommate, I say that for a reason. My college roommate brought with him a backpack and a pair of scissors. Okay. Yeah. Ohio State beats St. John's to go to the Final Four. And during the celebration, I was in the press area. My college roommates were up in the down at the bottom of the upper level. And you remember all the banners they used to hang? Like now it's all digital on the scoreboard and stuff, but they used to hang like regional banners. Like you would see them on CBS. My college roommate, while the celebrating is going on, cut down the banner and rolled it up and stuffed it in his backpack and brought it home.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was awesome.
That 99 run, the reason why it's so awesome and memorable for me to this day, first of all, you have to understand, and you do, and most of your listeners, I'm sure, do too, but how terrible they were the year before.
8-22, and maybe not that good.
Yeah. Like it was rough stuff, and obviously Scooney had to sit out. And then so you go through 8-22. I think one win in the Big Ten, and then you have this glory run with a real leader at point guard, with Michael Redd busting out, with George Reese coming into his own, and everybody kind of filling their role. They changed the lineup during the year. Brian Brown steps in for John Sanderson and kind of completes them on both sides of the ball. And you're thinking, well, maybe this team can even do something in the postseason. But then they don't do well in the Big Ten tournament.
Right.
And I think our cover at for BSB infamously was March Sadness. They lost to like 11th seeded Illinois, I want to say, in the Big Ten tournament. You're like,
Which
oh,
I'll
man.
cut you off real quick. Illinois had Corey Bradford, and they were in the new
They
regime
were not
change,
that
right?
bad. Yeah.
The next year they would take that step. And also, Scooney Penn, remember he hurt his tailbone at Penn State, the last regular season game.
That's right.
And I think they kind of were being gingerly with him. But absolutely, it was kind of, and we were in Chicago. We did get the broadcast that they only got to play one game. We were like, we're going to be here all weekend. This is going to be great. And then they lost. But yeah, go ahead. It was just,
I think they get Murray State in the old RCA Dome or Hoosier Dome or whatever it was called back then. And they handle business there. And you're like, well, it's probably going to be UCLA. And
absolutely.
I'm kind of a closet UCLA fan, being an LA kid. So I'm like, this is going to be cool. So I go and sit behind Steve Lavin, like right behind in the press overflow area, right behind the UCLA bench. I'm like, I'm going to see if this guy knows how to coach, because I wasn't so sure. Turns out he did know how to coach, but they ran into a Detroit team that was really good. I want to say Percy Watson was their coach. And what was funny about that game is Reggie Miller was sitting just right behind me, rooting for his alma mater. And his former, or at the time, his current Pacers teammate, Jalen Rose, is across the arena sitting with Mrs. Watson, the coach's wife, because Percy was an assistant coach for that Michigan team that we all remember. And
wasn't he was a high school coach too, wasn't he? Didn't he come with Jalen maybe to the
I'm trying to remember. There were deep connections there.
Right.
And it was so funny to watch from across the arena floor. Jalen and Reggie like going at it. I don't think the cameras ever picked up on this on CBS, but I saw the whole thing. That was hilarious. And Reggie's doing this when UCLA took the lead, and then Jalen's getting him back or whatever. But Detroit pulls off the upset. And then I remember Ohio State comes out, and see if you can correct me or corroborate this. I want to say at the under 12 timeout of that OSU Detroit game, the Titans still had not scored a point. It may have been like 19-0 or something like that. And I remember hearing somebody faintly way up in the bleachers, who probably drove over from Columbus, and I'm sure was not a fan of Michigan teams in general, went, "You've got 0." And I thought, that's pretty funny. Ohio State rolls, wins that game. So that was like, that was already, we're already getting the gravy, right? Like you said, just making it to Knoxville, getting to the regional, and kind of putting away what happened at the Big Ten tournament, which I believe was in Chicago that year.
It was. That Detroit game was 75-44.
Yeah. I mean, they clamped them. That was, and I remember Nashawn Coleman, you mentioned him. He was horribly sick. I don't even know if he played in that game. He had the flu or something, and everyone celebrating in the locker room. And he was in bad shape. Like Mike Bordner, another late great, had to go tend to him right away. I do remember that. But then, the Auburn game, I'll tell you this real quick. We get to Knoxville, and I'm sitting courtside. And what I remember about that game vividly is I was sitting next to Charles Farmer from the Column Post, good friend of mine, a great guy. And again, this is the no cheering in the press box thing, right? Like, it's hard not to get caught up in the excitement sometimes. And if they lose, and I experienced this all through the 90s, you talked about how bleak the 90s were. I had to go in those weepy locker rooms after Michigan games and go in and ask the 95 OSU men's basketball team, do you think you can win a game, in the Big Ten this year, and things like that. I'm watching this glorious moment where Brian Brown comes up with a steal, or maybe it was Singleton came up with the steal, flipped it to Brian Brown. And I remember thinking, he's not gonna, is he? and he does that wraparound behind the back pass. It's back to Singleton, dunk. And I am like, I've got my fist like this under the curtain on the table, and I am just pounding Charles's leg because I can't react on TV. But I'm thinking, this is not happening. We're not beating an SEC team in SEC country and even putting the cherry on it. Are we? Are we doing this? And Charles showed me the next day. He's like, you bruised my leg, dude. Like, I got a little wrapped up in that one. But then that next night, that's what's so weird about with no internet or whatever back then. We were compiling quotes and all that to bring back with us to write for the next BSB. We didn't have to go online. We didn't have to do chats. We didn't have to do any of that stuff. We had a free day the next day to watch the other regional finals. And I remember Ohio State had a dinner for the media. So we're eating and drinking on the university. And Tony and Charles and I hung around afterwards, and we're having and Steve Hellwagon, and we're having deep discussion about, but this is all great and this has been magical, but I'm like, they're not gonna beat St. John's. And I remember Charles going, oh yeah, they're gonna win. He was super confident. He was like, he turned the ball over too much. Barkley's a good player, but Scooney's gonna get in his head. And that game was a master class. I say this all the time. If you really watch the NCAA tournament, especially with the elongated timeouts, and I think Thad Matta was brilliant with this, it really is, the games really are a series of 4-minute increments. And if you keep winning the 4 minutes or do something positive at the end of those 4 minutes to keep momentum on your side or to keep momentum away from them, you're in good shape. You're probably going to be successful. And if you watch that game, Ohio State did that at the end of every 4-minute increment. It was a Ken Johnson block or a Scooney 3 or a Michael Redd basket or something that kept Ohio State up and hopeful. And obviously they pull that off. So when they lose to UConn in the Scooney blood jersey game, down in St. Pete, one of the worst venues ever.
It was, wasn't it?
For they lose the UConn game. Steve looks at me and he goes, "Do you want to just go?" And we have a courtside seat to watch the number 1 and number 2 team in the country. Michigan State's about to play Duke in the nightcap on national television. I've got a courtside seat. The 8-year-old of me, the 12-year-old of me, the 17-year-old of me would have said, good God, no, I'm not going anywhere. But the adult who had just covered this odyssey of Ohio State basketball was like, yeah, let's get out of here. Let's go celebrate. That was the greatest season we're ever going to cover. Let's go to Ybor City, have a couple drinks, watch this on TV. And that's exactly what we did. And I remember I started packing up to leave, and Mateen Cleaves' mom, who I had got to know a little bit, I stayed in the same hotel with her at the Big Ten tournament. She tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Baby, are you leaving?" I said, "Yeah, ma'am, I am." I said, "Good luck to the Big Ten, but we're going to go." We walked out of the arena, and I remember the first person I saw when I got out of the arena was Jay Crawford, formerly of Channel 10, who was doing TV down there.
Yeah, he was in Tampa.
Yeah, he said hi to us, and he goes, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "We're going across town, and we're gonna go party." And he goes, "Man, I wish I could do that too," because he still had work to do, obviously. But it was just like I try to fully explain. I don't know if people really get it. I guess you had to like really be there and live it. But that was just 30 games of fun, excitement, joy. There were some struggles too, or whatever, but man, what a fun ride that was. Scooney has said that we should probably have a 30 for 30 about that year. And I said, man, I would be all in, and I could talk to anybody that all day long about that season, because
I remember
story.
I still had all my notes because I would call the games. I called all the home games. I did not go to any road games, but I called the Big Ten tournament game, and I was at. I didn't get to go to the Murray State game because I had a final. How about that? But I was at all the rest of the games. My odyssey, you talk about it being an odyssey. My odyssey to and from these games, I already told you the one, And then we go down to Tampa, St. Pete. We don't have a hotel yet. It's just me and my one college roommate at this point. We're going to go all the way down to Fort Myers, where some other people we knew were with their parents. So we're like, all right, we know we've got a place to stay because grown-ups are involved. And we're going to stay there for a few nights. My car's, I never even knew this was a thing. My car's accelerator cable snaps getting on the highway in Brandon, Florida, after I got gas. We wait for a tow truck for 3.5 hours. We end up in a hotel in Brandon, Florida, and somehow they put us up every night that we're there, just night to night. And I remember like One-on-One Sports was the name of the national sports. Bob Berger, I think his name is. He still does a lot with NFL Network and things like that. Yeah. He was in my hotel. I got to know him a little bit, and we're there, and we're going all around, and that's still like miles east of St. Pete. So we've got to go across and over and down and fight traffic. And a scalper from California offered my roommate and our friend Sarah, he offered them $2,500 a piece for their student tickets, and she wouldn't take it. And my college roommate's like, hey, that's a quarter's tuition. Come on. And he's like, we'll go down the street and watch it in a sports bar. And she wouldn't do it. He tried to buy my press pass from me. And he said I could have gotten over $8,000 or $10,000 for it. And I was like, yeah, but I might never get to cover a game again in my life if someone else is using my press pass.
I traded my 99 Final Four pass for an Ohio State band jacket. Someone in the band really wanted my pass, and I really wanted his jacket, and we did it away from off the beaten path and made the switch. No, that's not right. That was another pass. That was from another Final Four. But the 99 pass, actually, I met Magic Johnson, my all-time favorite athlete. He's there supporting Michigan State. I see him up a few rows behind me. I'm like, I try not to be like a sycophantic person. I don't ask people for autographs. I really don't. I've done it. I could count on one hand the number of times I've ever done that. But I had to go up and at least talk to him. And I did say, because someone had handed him a Sharpie, I said, could you sign my pass? And he said, sure, man.
Hey.
So I still got my 99 Final Four pass with Magic Johnson's autograph on it.
I actually have the same story, and I'm a student reporter thinking this is very serious. I'm not, like you said, not cheering, all that. But at the Auburn game, because a lot of you guys were across the court, I was on the other side for the Auburn game, and then I ended up sitting with Ryan Miller and Jay Burson for the St. John's game because I was by myself. At the Auburn game, Charles Barkley was 3 rows above me.
Yes, I know where he was, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and so I remember I take my press pass and I flip it around my back because I'm like, A, Charles Barkley might see that I'm media and just give me a hard time, but B, I just don't want to be that guy that I'm a kid, right? So I had my program, and I had him sign. Actually, I think it might have been Ohio State's. Remember they printed the media guide, but they printed it was more like the OSU print shop did it with the black binding on it and stuff. It wasn't the more professional one. I think I had him sign that, and he signed that for me. And I'm like, that's the only time I've done this. But yeah, so the same tournament, you and I both got stars to sign things.
To 2007 run. I'm at the Alamo Dome, and halftime of the Ohio State game, I look up and I see David Robinson sitting up there. I'm like, I got to do this. I went up there and I did introduce myself as a member of the media, and I said, Greg Oden is projected to be maybe the number 1 pick of the draft. I wonder if you just have any opinion about him. That's the only reason why I'm bothering you. I'm sorry to bother you. He was gracious and wonderful and gave me great quotes. I mean, sometimes you just got to ask,
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny. I think it's already woven into some of our stories. And I say this to a lot of people. Being a sports writer has taken me to places and put me in situations where I've had to pinch myself that are surreal. Where you're like, how did I get here? And it also, along with that, is very unglamorous. I've got a car. We got on the media shuttle. Steve, Dave Biddle, and I had my own website at the time in 2014, sportswrapup.com. Steve and Dave working for Bucknuts, and I was still doing radio with TVN. So they were doing their online stuff that they had to do right before going to out to Arlington, and I had my responsibilities. So there was maybe one other knucklehead along with us. We're the last four idiots to take the final shuttle over to the national championship game, Ohio State, Oregon. Right, the bus breaks down on the
Yep.
freeway, and now they've got a call for another bus, and we're like, do we want to stand out in the field over here, or just stay on the bus and have cars zing by 75 miles an hour, which is a little unsettling. And we waited a good long time, and I'm thinking, am I going to be late for the national championship game? So the new bus finally comes. He scoops us up. He gets off, and we're like, wow, there it is. There's AT&T Stadium. It's humongous, right? Like, that's incredible. Bus driver turns and goes the other way. And my first thought, Seth, was, well, this is cool. I bet this is one of those deals where he knows a little loop around where
Right.
where the shuttle like goes under the overpass and goes right up to the stadium door, because a lot of times they have situations like that. No, he's just driving to I don't know, Lubbock or something, whatever he's doing, and and we're like, sir, the stadium, the big game is back there in the big building, and now he's got nowhere to turn around. We're in a neighborhood where there was nowhere to turn around, and he had to go like a mile and a half or something before he could even turn the bus around. I'm thinking, I'm going to be late. So I get checked in, sniffing dogs and all that. I mean, they're getting ready to kick the ball. And I go up to the press box, and I find out I'm in the overflow area above that. I'm like, I got to go to the bathroom real quick. I go in the restroom, and all I see is yellow, 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 Oregon, Oregon, Oregon. I'm thinking, oh my God, the place is crawling with Oregon fans. I can't believe this. Wow. Right? Because I hadn't even looked out at the field yet. I finally get out to my seat, like during the national anthem, and I start looking around. I go, oh no. Okay, yeah. It's about 70-30, maybe 75-25 red in here. We're good. So, but that was crazy. And there's so many stories of, sleeping on the floor so you can cover an NCAA tournament game, coming home at 4 a.m. from, East Lansing or West Lafayette to cover a game that ended at 10 o'clock at night, and you had to stay and write a story till midnight. And now you got to drive all the way home. I mean, really unglamorous stuff. And we weren't exactly making a mint of money back then either.
Right.
It's not like we were getting rich doing this, just rich with experience. But
Yeah.
then the moments where you're around people and you're like, I'll give you one real quick. The Jack Nicklaus Museum finally opened in 2002. This is like May of 2002, I think. And they had a whole ribbon cutting ceremony, and it's really going to be an awesome event or whatever. And I go to cover it, and I'm with BSB at the time. But I think I put in for a media pass as WTVN so that Steve could go too, and we could both be there. Well, they announced, we're going to pull some names out of a hat. We're going to have a few media members go in with Jack. By the way, Jack, Arnie, Gary Player. So they're going to cut the ribbon. Their remarks and whatever, the members of the Nicklaus family spoke, and the university and all this and whatever. And then these handful of people are going to walk in the building and go around, and then we're going to open it up to the public. I'm like, oh, cool. Pull out a name, Dom Taberry. Pull out another name, Steve Hellwagon. Pull out another name, my name. What? So I'm now walking through the building for the first time, anyone's allowed in there, with Jack and these other legends of the game. I believe their wives too. And I'm just thinking, and we're taking pictures, we're listening to conversations. Jack's going, oh, remember that club, Gary? And and you're just going, what? And how all the times you wish you were a fly on the wall? I was like a fly on the wall, and I'm like,
Exactly.
this is insane. And so just little old me with, who didn't even write for a major publication or whatever, got to be in that situation. And I have a lot of other examples of that. Obviously, we don't have the time, but the point being that, yeah, very unglamorous, but also these amazing experiences that, that mere mortals, I guess, wouldn't normally get to have. And so you learn to appreciate those for sure.
Absolutely. And you're right. I'm looking at a clock here. It says we've gone over 49 minutes, and I knew this would happen. I knew it would happen. let me workshop the one other thing, and I don't think this isn't something I would like run to put in stone. But I have a friend who I used to work with at Suburban News, Brian Inglis. He's about my age, year older, and he grew up here in town. So I grew up Southeast Ohio. I followed it all, but he was here, right, for a lot of it. He attended Gary Williams basketball camp, Randy Ayers basketball camp, things like that. His theory is, and I want your thoughts on this, and I don't think it's 100% true, but I think it's worth talking about. My friend Brian's theory is that Jim Jackson era of Ohio State basketball, and it became cool again to be an Ohio State fan at that point, because you're looking at, in football, you had 9-3 Earl, the facilities maybe were starting to fall apart. John Cooper comes in, immediately gets, I remember the other paper and other places, like he's an out of towner, he's a Southerner, he's he doesn't get it, things like that. But my friend's theory is that Jimmy Jackson in that era of Ohio State basketball, basically 91 and 92 specifically, made it cool to be a Buckeye fan again. And that helped shepherd and bring in the era of Ohio State football and the great players that really started coming in. I guess, again, I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, but your thoughts on that, because it does kind of, it was before the nice run that Cooper had in the 90s with football.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. When you look at the 91 Indiana game, where, by the way, Keith Jackson and Dick Vitale are on the call for ABC. I sat 2 rows behind Dick Vitale's bald head for that game because they had to create a 3rd row for the media, and I got courtside. Steve Snap, of course, put me in the 3rd row, but I got courtside right behind those guys. And normally I was up on the court, but when you think about games like that, when you think about the fact that Ricky Dudley actually did also play, obviously, on the football team, right. It was a top 10 draft pick in the NFL and was friends with all those guys, and I think friends to this day with Jimmy and those guys. They had a coolness to them with Mark Baker, with Chris Gent. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And when you look at some of the people that John Cooper understood that you had to get guys from Texas, guys from Florida. And again, I'm not sure he still gets enough credit for how they recruited. They did a good job of getting key people from Ohio, but also got guys at a national level the whole time he was there. You think about the running back room in the early 90s when they still weren't even an elite program yet.
My goodness. Yeah.
When they had Butler Benote, when they had Robert Smith, they bring in Quiet Storm, right? Raymont. And then Eddie after that. I think in 92, every one of those guys I named, I think, was there.
I think they all played in that Syracuse game.
Yeah.
They were all on the field at one time or another.
Like those guys were all pros. They were all tremendous players. And then I think, to your friend's point, it did coincide with Ohio State getting good again, right? When 92, Kirk Herbstreit plays his heart out in the tie. I think he throws 55 passes, which was a record at the time. You never heard of an Ohio State quarterback ever doing that. They were trying so desperately hard to beat Michigan. And of course, the infamous Gordon Gee quote about it's our greatest victory. 93, as you mentioned, they're a top 5 team. 94 got a little rough, but they did beat Michigan finally and broke through. And then 95, I think we're running out of time, obviously. I could go through those losses to Michigan and how I would rank them or categorize them in the 90s. They're all painful in their own way. But the 95 team not being able to go up there and win after the year they had and the schedule they played and the amazing run with Bobby Hoyne and Eddie George and those guys, that one sticks out a lot because that was when things really, that was a loaded roster. A ton of those guys obviously had great careers in the NFL. I mean, Orlando Pace, for goodness sake, they were so good. And you're right. The coolness finally shifted back to Ohio State. The Fab Five kind of did that for Michigan for a long time. And it got to I wrote a column one time, it's probably the most homerish thing I ever wrote, about how the obnoxiousness of Michigan reached maximum level in 97 with Woodson, and when they were number one and they beat Ohio State again, and la, la, la. But it really goes back to the Fab Five. That was their glory era where they could really puff their chest out and they were sticking it to Ohio State. But if you look at it, Ohio State was just as good, if not better, in that run in terms of number of great athletes that they had in those two programs. So it's really an interesting time. And it's kind of hard to believe now that Ohio State could ever even dip down like that again. You mentioned we're kind of seeing it in basketball, unfortunately, but in football, it's on such solid footing. And the fact that Ryan Day is in an era now where, as we just saw, where you can lose that huge game and still make your postseason run, not make people forget about it. Let's not act like we've forgotten about losses to Michigan. But it makes up for a lot. Imagine if John Cooper had that. I bet you that 98 team would have won a national championship with a repeat after losing at home to Michigan State and learning their lesson from that. I am certain they were the best team in the country that year. Ironically, I think the best Ohio State basketball team I ever covered was 2011, 10-11 team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though the 07 team obviously got farther and had great players. That was, I mean, for people to think it can't happen in both sports, I think is still funny to me.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I don't know why anyone would say that when it's been proven. But what's also strange is it never seems like it's happened. Like I mentioned 98, but we also mentioned how terrible the basketball team was that year. 95, I mentioned how good the football team was, how terrible the basketball team was that year. And there are a lot of years like that where it wasn't on the same plane. So it's going to happen again, and no one should be surprised. This has just been, to get to cover these programs as just some goof from Ohio State.
That's right.
Who, I wasn't on ESPN. I never wrote for USA Today or anything like that, but I got to cover some amazing, great, classic games and be right in the fray of some of the most exciting moments in college football and basketball history, really. What a privilege, and it can happen covering Ohio State. There's no doubt about it.
So you mentioned 98, but realistically, though, that school year, the 98-99 school year, yeah. I hold a small thing. It's only here in my heart that I have it. Paul Keels began his tenure as Ohio State's football and basketball announcer in 1998. So his first season calling it was 98 football and 98-99 basketball. Same for me, sophomore year student radio. I was able to be, on the mic with football and basketball. And in baseball, had to run they had to the super regional and the regional back then. One game away from going to the College World Series for the first time in decades. And so, yeah, that was an amazing time. And I will say, too, your point earlier, it's not just that John Cooper didn't get a playoff to coach in. It goes beyond that, because back then, because of the Big Ten had added the 11th team in Penn State a few years earlier, or during that run, actually. And when you lose that game in 95 to Michigan, and it's not just that you didn't get to go to the Rose Bowl, or the way we look at it today, you didn't go to a playoff. There was no BCS. There was no New Year's Six back then. There was none of that. So basically, losing that game meant, in both in 95 and 96, meant you're going to a lesser bowl. And, that Citrus Bowl became, the thing for a few years.
I remember telling somebody, Seth, like, I bet you they lose their bowl game now.
Well, yeah.
It just wasn't going to mean that much to them. And, of course, they play a good Tennessee team with Peyton Manning, and then it rains, and you're like, here we go.
Spikes. And, but they did the same thing as Georgia, the same thing as Auburn earlier. Like, it's not, to me, it's not even just because we don't know how good of a big game coach John Cooper was when we get right down to it. But it's not like he didn't even get the chance. But then beyond that, like, how many years going forward did a Jim Tressel team get to go to the Fiesta Bowl? Right. I mean, it's just crazy to me. And you think about the years where, like, Northwestern gets to go to the Rose Bowl because we didn't get to play each other, or Wisconsin, the same thing. Right. It's just, that stuff was just annoying. And that's what made it so devastating But I'd argue also that maybe it made it like mean more, right? It made it like more special if you could get over the top, which takes me to the last story we'll share. All right.
Okay.
Tressel gets hired. 0-2 happens. We don't need to retell the story of 14-0 because, it was amazing. That ride was amazing in part because of the close games, the Murray's on and off the field stuff. You and I are both out in Tempe covering the game. I was on the roof of the press box. I don't know where you were for most of the game. I literally was on the roof of a press box calling a game. I'm looking over at that mountain next to the stadium. I think I'm just as high as that mountain.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, 5 minutes to go in a game, the print media gets to go down to the field. And if you think about that, when you go double overtime in a national championship game with all the timeouts and all the TV breaks and all that, I think I added up one time, we were on that field over an hour watching football, that close. And I want to share two things, aside from the fact that it's like, oh my goodness, that's so-and-so. That's, even like, I remember, why is Jim Furyk down here? Well, his wife's from Columbus. It's things like that. But Eddie George and people that want to say Kirk Herbstreit doesn't love Ohio State. There's a picture of him on basically with his arm around Eddie George, and he's like levitating off the ground when Ohio State made a big play. And he's down there with all those guys. I remember the startling thing to me was, of all the guys, because having been there, Jonathan Wells, right? He went through the toughest little short period there when things weren't going well and John Cooper got fired. He's on the field too. And that was pretty cool to me. But two things that I saw that where I was almost like consoling someone. All right. Richard Lewis, the comedian, is on the field. And
yep, I witnessed
they have a big pass play. And I'm kind of like, I see him, I hear him telling jokes to people. It's like he thinks that's what he has to do is tell jokes, right? There's a big pass play for Miami, and I forget who caught it. And Richard Lewis goes straight to like covering his eyes. And he's like, oh no, oh no, oh no. And he fumbled though. And Ohio State recovered, but he wasn't watching. So I go, it's okay. It's okay. We got the ball back. We got the ball back. And he goes, what? And, he says something about, I need to call my shrink. That was his big bit. Well, then the play that you and I have always shared, and this is where you and I are trying to be media members, but, we thought the game was over. The play where they threw the flag and Chris Gamble was interfered with / held. I don't know if they litigated that correctly as far as which penalty they called, but everybody bleeding scarlet and gray will say it was a penalty. But it was a late penalty. And fireworks went off. And I remember one of the safeties for Miami actually threw his helmet up and it shattered. And yet they still had to play the next play. You actually were on the field. And I'm like dragging you back. Hey, Jeff, there's a flag. There's a flag. Right. You remember it that way.
Man, should we just start a new show and do a part 2? Because I could talk another 45 minutes just about my memories from that game. The 98, 99 basketball one is my most memorable season. The Tostitos Fiesta Bowl of 03 is my most memorable game. I still have vivid memories. I have a lot of the same observations you do about it. Just to start with this, I was down on the Ohio State sideline with a photo pass.
You were there the whole game. Okay.
For the first quarter.
Okay.
And interesting, you bring up Jim Furyk. I was talking to, and now his name of his wife escapes me. I was talking to her, and very sweet. And I said, "Oh, you've got a little OSU logo. Are you a fan?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm from Westerville." And we're talking, and she says something about my husband, this or whatever. Well, her husband finally turns around, and it's Jim Furyk. I'm like,
you knew who he was, yeah.
Okay. So at the end of the quarter, I said, "Do you want me to take a picture of you guys?" And they said, "Sure." I thought maybe I should take some pictures since I'm down here with a photo pass. And by the way, during that first quarter, like Matthew McConaughey's walking around. I think Cal Ripken walked by me at one point.
Yeah.
Remember, we honored all these athletes before the game, and another one of those surreal moments when all this stuff is going on. So I took this picture of them, and that next summer, when I saw Jim at the Memorial Tournament, I had a photographer buddy of mine blow up the photo. I didn't frame it, but I blew it up so it was a nice big print, and I handed it to Jim Furyk, and he was like really tickled that I
That's
did
awesome.
that and thought that was great. Yeah, again, I remember Richard Lewis pacing around and muttering to himself, like, "Oh, this isn't an act. This is really
That's
neurosis."
who he is. Yeah.
And then at the end of the quarter, we made a deal. I was going to switch passes with our other photographer who was in the one end zone, and I was going to anchor myself there for the second period. So I was over there when we had the fake field goal and some of that stuff that was going on. And I remember vividly walking that way and seeing Kirk on the sideline with Sean Salisbury, who's like
Mhm.
not my favorite all-time reporter, to be
Right.
honest with you. And I remember walking by him, and Roscoe Parrish had just scored that first touchdown. He burned one of our corners. It might have been Donnie Nicky. And Sean Salisbury's talking crap to Kirk, and he's like, "I told you, man." He's like, He's like, "You're not going to keep up. There's no way. Like this team's going to roll Ohio State." And he's going on and on. I'm thinking, you know what I noticed during the first quarter? Ohio State was doing very well in the trenches, and that's
Mhm.
when I felt like they could pull this off, because I wasn't so sure either. They were 2-touchdown underdog. They've got Vernon Carey, who's a pro right tackle. They've got Brett Romberg, who I think
Mhm.
won the award for best center that year. Obviously they were loaded along the deep. They had Vince Wilfork on the other side of the ball. I mean, just studs everywhere, right? You mentioned Sean Taylor. Sean Taylor looked like one of the best players on the field at moments of that game. He's only a sophomore. He's the one who threw his helmet up in the air and it
Mhm.
shattered. They were absolutely loaded, but you could see Ohio State was holding their own up front on both sides of the ball.
Yep.
And that's what gave me hope. I wasn't a real fan of doing the trick play and some of the other things. I wasn't really sure where the game was going to go. But so, yeah, first quarter on the sideline, second quarter in the end zone, third quarter up in my press seat. And then fourth quarter, like you said, I think I even started heading down before that 5-minute time or whatever. It's probably more like 8 minutes. I start heading down to go down to the field. And I want to say the play where Maurice Clarett steals the ball back away
Mhm.
and all that sequence happened literally while I was like walking down the steps to go back to the sideline. And then it felt like you watched an entire another game,
Oh,
obviously, from
yeah.
that point
Yeah, it
on.
was a drama.
So much that happened. And I agree with you. I think you and I have already had this conversation before. There is no question that Chris Gamble was grabbed when he went into his break to make his turn. He's absolutely mugged. The problem was the TV cameras the only replay they showed and cycled back to the guys in the booth, which is why Dan Fouts is like, bad call, didn't show that.
Right.
And then, of course, you have the late flag. And
Mhm.
I give that ref a lot of credit, man, to sit there and go, "Am I going to let them win the national championship on this?" No, I'm not. And he did, I think.
Yeah, he did that first.
But
Yep.
then the referee, who was close to the play, ran over and did the interference call or whatever, and that was confusing too. But yes, I was at least 15 yards out on the field when the
You were
flag.
furious.
Yeah, the flag's out. And I'm like, well, that's it. Or I'm thinking that's it. And then the flag comes out, and I'm like,
Yeah, I grabbed your shirt.
yeah.
I'm like, "We gotta come
But the
back."
other thing I will tell you to corroborate what you just said, another thing I always remember about that game is because of where Maurice Clarett was in his headspace with that whole week and losing his friend and everything. Tim Spencer was not the only former OSU running back coaching Maurice Clarett that night. He had
That's
about
right.
5 coaches, because
Yeah,
he had Raymont Harris working him, he had Jonathan Wells working him, he had Keith Byers working him, and he had Eddie George working him.
that's right.
They were all there. They were all going over and trying to keep him in the game. And then the last story I'll tell real quick. You mentioned Eddie George. I was next to him on the sideline for the LSU national championship game, and I was also right next to him on the sideline at the end of the game that we're talking about. And this is the story. So after the game is over, I get called into my well, I'll start with this. When the game ends, I don't know what to do, but I'm standing next to Eddie George. Well, Eddie George just explodes and runs onto the field. I'm like, I guess I'm following Eddie George. So that's what I did. So I went in when I got back to Columbus and talked to my boss, our publisher, Frank, about the game. He said, "Hey, I need to show you something." I said, "Sure." He goes, "My parents actually live in Miami, and they sent the cover of the Miami Herald, shot from the other sideline. I thought you'd want to see this." And it's a shot of the Ohio State bench and everyone reacting to the final play. Like, that is really cool. I haven't seen that yet. That's really awesome. He goes, "I'm not showing you this because I'm
Look at this.
happy." He goes, "Look closely." And I go, "What?" He goes, "Where are you?" I'm like, "I guess that's got to be me. That's Eddie. That's the end of the bench. That's Eddie. That's got to be me." Yeah, that's me. He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You're like this high off the ground." I look and I'm like, "Damn, yeah. I didn't even know I had a vertical like that." I go, "I guess I am." He goes, "Jeff, I don't pay you to root for Ohio State. I pay you to cover the ball game." No. I said, "Frank, I don't know what to say." Like, I didn't even know how to react to that. Like, I don't even remember jumping. You know what I mean? Like, it was just organic. And
Yeah.
kid who grows up in Columbus, goes to Ohio State, like I said, sees his brother's alma mater win a national championship right away, wonders if he's ever going to witness this in his lifetime. Well, I finally did, and I was right there. And apparently I leapt way off the ground. I don't remember doing that. I don't remember telling my brain to do that, but that's how that went. And I didn't really apologize too much. I got his point, but I
Yeah.
didn't apologize too much.
I,
I said, "Frank, I think we did a pretty good job of covering this one. I think you have nothing to be embarrassed about. We gave you a lot of coverage, and I think we did a good job." But
I'd like to see that photo because Eddie ran over me when he got on the field, so I have to be right there. I have the panoramic photo of the last play, and I was wearing a gray sweater, and I'm like the way the crossbar is. You can look right through it and see me, so I know where I've got that hanging upstairs. I had a similar thing. We were uber local, and I want to back up a little bit before we say goodbye. I was with Suburban News first year out of college.
Yeah.
First full year out of college. And I got nothing to go to that game. I paid for my flight. I paid for my hotel. I got nothing from my company to cover the game. I got a press pass because our company covered Ohio State all year, and Craig James was not going to go use the press pass, so we got it in my name. They knew who I was because I'd worked there for 3 years. So I get home, I literally put together the sports page, and the next page was all me, and then even some jump pages. And our guy wrote, "Hey, good local stories, local stories galore." I interviewed Michael Coleman. I interviewed Steve Tovar, who was coaching at Upper Arlington at the time. I interviewed everybody with a Columbus tie because that was what we were doing. I think Bryce Culver was a walk-on from Olentangy High School. I stood next to him during Carmen, Ohio to get his thoughts on everything and had a story about him for the Olentangy newspaper. That's how local I got. When I did something else with more of an Ohio State, more of a 30,000 foot view. And he wrote on that, he gave me the paper, the Upper Arlington News, and said, "Good local stories galore." And then on the inside, "Well, I don't see how this has to do with our coverage." And I was like, I gave you 9 stories about this.
Yeah.
And I never got a dime for it, aside from the fact I didn't have to buy my ticket. And we were worried about this one little sidebar I wrote. I remember talking to Jimmy Jackson and Lawrence Funderburk. They were at the Kings at the time, and they were at the game. That was really cool. Jeff, we've gone over an hour and 10 minutes here. It's cruising along. You're
cut
right.
Out whatever you need to cut out, Seth.
I think we could do a whole other episode on just that game. But I really appreciate you and the memories we shared, and just awesome stuff. So thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
All right. Hey, tune into all things Buckeye Huddle. Again, the Buckeye Banter episodes are evergreen, so you can check out all of them in the podcast tab on YouTube, or just subscribe to the Buckeye Banter audio podcast as well. We are wherever you can get podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and come back again for the next Buckeye Banter.